So I give the floor to you.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. I see we have a number of participants who are registered, who are already joining. My name is Alex Simarawi from the Global Water Partnership. So I'm very excited to, on behalf of the UNFCCC Secretariat, to invite you to this event by the NAP champions. So just to also mention that this is a series that the UNFCCC Secretariat has been convening, NAP the Champions webinar series. And this is the fourth, actually. Some of the two of them took place last year, and then we had another one that took place this year, early this year. And then this is the fourth event that we are going to be discussing over the next 90 minutes. As you already know, I think the world is going through a difficult period at the moment because of the pandemic. It's affecting literally everyone's life, including everyone on this panel. But the subject of climate change and particularly adaptation must go on, particularly because of the challenges that actually are compounded by both climate change and the pandemic. So this is why the UNFCCC Secretariat, together with their partners in the NAP Technical Working Group, as well as under the leadership of the NAP champions and the LIST expert group, the LEG, saw it fit to try and make sure that we keep the agenda of national adaptation plans going on at a global level, but at the same time making sure that countries are able to provide and receive whatever support that may be needed regarding the national adaptation plans. So today's event is basically focusing on advancing national adaptation plans, and it is really going to focus on in terms of what is needed to make sure that every country has a national adaptation plan. It is not only a requirement under the UNFCCC Paris Agreement, but at the same time, we know that it is needed for countries to be able to adapt to the climate risks that they face because of the threats that are posed by climate change. So how do we get every country to be able to develop a national plan? Not only developing it, but also making sure that every country is able to be supported in terms of technical assistance, and also how do we ensure that there's cross-learning across the different countries, sharing experiences, and how do we ensure learning not only by the countries, but also the many partners that support national adaptation planning so that they're able to share experiences and knowledge. So to lead us in those discussions, we have a distinguished panel at which you have seen on the agenda as was shared. So I'm the moderator from the Global Water Partnership, basically representing the NAP Technical Working Group, which is a group of partners that support national adaptation plans. And also in terms of the speakers, we have key distinguished speakers. I think we're going to have an all-female panel, which is I'm very, very excited about, because in these conversations, often we find that it's often a lot of men that dominate these discussions. But we have very distinguished and very qualified and very competent women that are going to be leading us, not only because they know the subject matter, but also because they are working on some of these issues. So our first speaker is going to be one of the NAP champions from the Philippines, and her name is Miss Lorraine Regada. She's currently the Deputy Speaker of the House of Congress from the Philippines. And then we are going to have another speaker as well, distinguished speaker, Miss Sonam Kandu, who is also going to speak on the subject of challenges in building essential elements and analytical tools, including data for LDCs. And our third speaker, who is going to be the keynote speaker, is Dr. Catherine Nakalambe. Dr. Catherine Nakalambe is basically from NASA, based in the United States, and from the NASA Harvest Africa Lead Program, University of Maryland in the United States. And she's going to be speaking about strengthening agriculture and food security decisions with Earth observation systems, machine learning as well. And just to echo that, she also was recognized very recently and awarded one of the prestigious prizes that she's going to talk about regarding some of her work across Africa. So colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, without wasting much time, we are going to get started. The event is 90 minutes. What's going to happen is that we're going to have these first two speakers that are going to lead us in terms of their key insights, and then we'll have points of reflections and clarifications. After the two speakers, the first two speakers, before we, then we'll have the keynote speaker, Dr. Catherine Nakalamba, who is going to come in for 15 to 20 minutes keynote address, after which we are going to have an interactive discussion focusing on three key points and that we're going to focus on. So just to say, please, if you have any questions or any comments, use the chat. The chat is going to be our friend for most of this afternoon. So you are welcome to post your chats, your questions, your clarifications on the chat, and our colleagues in the UNFCCC Secretariat are going to be monitoring this and will try as much as possible that we are able to respond to you. And also if you're not speaking, please mute your mic so that we make sure that everyone can hear and we're not distracted. And please switch on your video. If you are requested to speak, you can switch on your video so that participants can see you. And also use the chat box, as I've already mentioned, if you have any questions or comments. All presentations are going to be uploaded, and this event is being recorded, so you'll be able to follow afterwards if you have specific questions and comments. So may I also ask you, please, if you can write your name and maybe your email address or your organization in the chat box so that we can also make sure that we're able to record you as your attendance and be able to follow up and send you the link for this discussion. So with that, it's my honor now to invite Ms. Lorraine Regada, who is the National Adaptation Plan Global Champion, Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives from the Republic of Philippines. Ms. Lorraine Regada, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good day, Excellencies, colleagues in the UN Climate Change Secretariat Division, Adaptation Division, fellow climate advocates from different parts of the world joining us virtually today, ladies and gentlemen. I would have loved to personally meet and share ideas with all of you, but I also welcome the fact that we are holding this event virtually with as minimal carbon footprint as possible. I would also like to thank the UNFCCC Adaptation Division for giving me this opportunity and this honor to speak in this NAP Champions webinar and to share my insights on how we could ensure that we achieve successful adaptation in the next decade. I would like to start out by defining what adaptation means for us in the Philippines, my country that is so blessed with nature's wonder and bounty, but is also highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. In international headlines, you would know about us by the names of typhoons, the death tolls, the damage and losses. But you would also most likely hear about how tenacious the Filipino spirit is and how hopeful and optimistic we are despite these tragedies and devastation. You would see Filipinos smiling while wading through neck-deep flood water. And in this extra challenging time due to the pandemic, our nurses, frontliners, healthcare workers would brave the heavy rains as we do now have to get to work despite limited mobility options. But we do take adaptation very seriously. For us, adaptation is a matter of survival. It is a matter of life and death. It is key to protecting the lives of more than 106 million Filipinos, of conserving our biodiversity, and keeping our ecosystem afloat. It is crucial in keeping our economy amid the harshest of climate impacts that come our way. It is being able to ensure that we give our people and our country the best fighting chance to survive and thrive. We therefore place adaptation at the very core of our climate policies and our plans. Climate resilience, however, is a fleeting goal we have yet to achieve. In terms of the Global Climate Risk Index, the Philippines has consistently ranked high among countries vulnerable to climate impacts. We are an archipelagic country situated along the typhoon belt in the Pacific, which gives us the peculiar vulnerability of being recurrently affected by catastrophes. We are visited by an average of 20 tropical storms every year, but this is not the only reason why we endeavor to build adaptive capacities and invest in adaptation. Last year, 51 of our local governments declared a state of calamity due to droughts and dry spells induced by El Nino and aggravated by climate change. In the first quarter of 2019, the estimated damage to agriculture amounted to 168 million US dollars, affecting the lives of more than 247,000 Filipino farmers. Episodic climate-induced disasters, unfortunately, form only one subset of the threats our people are facing. Another involves slow onset effects, which take place without the drama of calamity, but are likely to inflict more lasting harm to our country's economic aspirations. These involve rising sea levels, ocean acidification, as well as serious and more frequent temperature stresses in our seas that result in coral bleaching. Just 3 months ago, we dealt with 47 coral bleaching reports, covering the entire range of low to extreme bleaching. This is beyond worrisome considering the country's reliance on fisheries for protein and tourism, while the resilience of our blue ecosystems depends on marine biodiversity. I know that for most, if not all of you, we go by similar vulnerabilities and definitions of what adaptation means for you or your country. Through this webinar, we must discuss how we can pursue and ensure the success of adaptation to overcome the challenges we face in the next decade or even beyond, keeping in mind the people, the environment, the future of humanity, and our planet we swore to protect. In this regard, let me share just a few insights and country experiences for our discussion today and how we can best achieve our goals. First, let us unite behind science to know our specific climate risks and vulnerabilities as a way to inform our actions and policies, most especially for our vulnerable populations on the ground. We've always considered that adaptation is local. We know that our communities bear the brunt of climate impacts, and therefore our local leaders must be able to address the risks and vulnerabilities specific to their area as effectively as possible. 80 provinces, 1,600 cities and municipalities, 42,000 barangays, or the smallest political unit, in an archipelago of more than 100 million people. But considering that our local communities have limited access to the best available science and information, this is one intervention that international and national entities can provide to our leaders and stakeholders on the ground. Our government has initiated partnerships with our schools, universities, higher education institutions to bring climate science on the ground. Through the Communities for Resilience, or CORE initiative, we provide direct trainings to our community local leaders and planners, conduct trainings of trainers, and establish regional consortiums as platforms for exchanging knowledge and best practices on local climate initiatives. We also hold trainings on Climate Change 101, very basic, climate and disaster risk assessment, greenhouse gas inventory, climate change expenditure tagging, accessing climate finance. But the main focus is in the formulation or enhancement of their respective local climate change action plans, what we call the LCCOPs of our local government units, our community's guide and toolkit to address local climate risks and vulnerabilities. We strive to make these LCCAPs as science-based and risk-informed as possible and consistent with national development plans. Since 2016, the program has served 124 higher education institutions and 166 local communities. And by conducting these trainings virtually in this pandemic, we hope to cater to more vulnerable communities and populations. This is one initiative that I am certain that academic institutions in your countries would be willing to be engaged in. Second, let us enable the environment for adaptation to work for us by building partnerships and fostering convergence across all levels. While many consider the Philippines as a pioneer in terms of environment and climate policies, with past legislation regarded as model for other countries, we still need to do more in terms of actually implementing these policies. We recognize that climate action is not solely the government's responsibility. It has to be participatory from all stakeholders from across all levels. There needs to be convergence. The Climate Change Act of 2009, when I was still senator since 1998, a law I principally authored and sponsored during my time in the Senate for 3 terms, envisions resilient communities through the mainstreaming of climate action in the development strategies and tools by government. The law created the Climate Change Commission, who I believe is joining us tonight, as our country's lead policy-making body on climate change, which eventually led the formulation of the National Climate Change Adaptation Plan, or NCCAP, that would outline our country's long-term adaptation and mitigation priorities. The NCCAP is our basis for the development of our National Adaptation Plan and the Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDC, in which we really strive to make the process as inclusive and participatory as possible from different sectors across all levels. Way back in 2012, I sponsored the People's Survival Fund as an amendatory law to the Climate Change Act, which I filed in 2007, which was enacted into law in 2009, in order to provide funding grants for adaptation projects by our local government units and organizations. As you see, way back in the 1990s, the Philippines has been climate engaged. And way back 20 years ago, I already filed the Adaptation Fund, which is a People's Survival Fund. We call this a People's Survival Fund, or the PSF, which is an annual allocation of 1 billion pesos or $20 million and may be augmented by other funding sources. It is one of the domestic public funds along our national and local disaster risk reduction and management fund and quick response fund that we could tap for financing adaptive responses and adaptation priorities. All of these I created in the laws I authored in my 3 terms in the Senate and funded when I was chair of a Senate Finance Committee for 5 years from 2015 till 2019. We recognize, however, that these funds, even those from international sources, are currently not enough to address our country's climate finance needs. In March of this year, the Monetary Board of the Central Bank of the Philippines approved the Sustainable Finance Framework, which we hope could catalyze green and resilient growth for our country. The framework seeks to safeguard the financial system from the evolving material hazards of physical climate risk and transition risk, including stranded assets. This would give banks the impetus to start pricing not only climate and transition risk, but also to value climate resilience and low carbon opportunities. The plans under the Sustainable Finance Framework will be an important catalyst for investors who are also putting more weight on environmental, social, and governance (ESG) standards. This also complements the work of our Securities and Exchange Commission, which previously released mandatory ESG reporting guidelines for publicly listed companies and issued the ASEAN Green Bond Standards in 2018. In 2019, the Philippines listed over $2 billion of green bonds, the third largest issuer in Southeast Asia after Singapore and Indonesia. To make adaptation work for us will require efforts from both the public and the private sectors to bring about needed investments to enable genuine resilience to our communities. Third, let us pursue global and regional cooperation to bolster the call for limiting the average global temperature to the rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius as urged by the Paris Agreement, which would entail accelerated efforts in the aspect of climate finance, technologies, and capacity building. As this year is a deadline for countries to submit their NDCs, we need to ensure that these targets are in line with the climate goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius of the Paris Agreement. It was a Climate Vulnerable Forum, or the CVF, a global alliance of developing countries, including the Philippines, which successfully fought for the inclusion of this more ambitious goal in the Paris Agreement. We should not stop at demanding for greater action from those that have caused this climate crisis. Hard-fought development gains and productivity will be undermined or reversed if the 1.5 degree limit of the Paris Agreement is breached. This is in recognition that mitigation is the best form of adaptation because it minimizes the scale and intensity of climate impacts to which we need to adapt. We have to build on existing global and regional initiatives on adaptation, such as the Global Commission on Adaptation's action tracks in the areas of rural well-being and food security, working with nature for more resilient infrastructure, water for urban growth and resilience, finance, youth leadership. These are the areas that have the greatest potential to bring about transformational change and accelerate adaptation to climate change according to the GCA. We also need to continue fostering South-South cooperation in order to share experiences and technologies that can be replicated, which will be vital for impactful adaptation action. And to end, I would like to share a few sections from the GCA business plan, which I think best encapsulates what is required from all of us to ensure the success of adaptation in the next decade. It goes, and I quote, "Even with the best intentions, change does not happen spontaneously. It must be conceived and directed. Global and national leaders need to urgently address the challenge of adapting to a warming planet with serious and sustained action. With our national adaptation plans, we have a chance to redraw the boundaries of possibility for the climate resilient world we must create together. We make them ambitious, but also achievable, certainly in dire need of being achieved over the next decade." So that is my presentation. I thank you for your patience and for being with me in the presentation of the Philippines. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that interesting and very enlightening presentation from the Philippines, from our NAP champion, Lorraine Arrogada. I want to thank you again for your leadership in the Philippines, both in your previous life as a senator and now as a congresswoman to the House of Representatives. So we appreciate definitely the work that you are doing out there in the Philippines and also globally. And I think thank you for emphasizing basically the importance of science, especially in this current environment where sometimes issues of science can be neglected at the expense of experience because of other challenges that we are going through. So I thank you very much for highlighting that. And my key takeaway basically is the importance of having an ambitious and robust adaptation plan, which I think you have done, and also with a very interesting, innovative ways of mobilizing funding, because often that's one of the issues that developing countries face. How do you mobilize funding for implementation? But you have been very, very innovative, also issuing a green bond for $2 billion, which is very, very ambitious and very exciting. But again, I mean, we know also that one of the key challenges that many countries face is the issue of data. Under the guidance that we get from the UNFCCC Secretariat, through the different guidelines that have been developed by the LIST expert group, the LEG, is the importance of policies that are based on science, that are based on data, as our previous speaker has just emphasized. But how do countries go around the issues and challenges around data, the issue of not having enough data to make informed decisions around climate change? So for this, we are going to have another speaker from the LIST expert group, who is going to now take us in terms of, on behalf of the LEG, present information around how countries can address the issues of challenges around data. Mrs. Sonam Kandu is a member of the LDC expert group, LIST Development Countries expert group. And as we know, a lot of the guidelines that we countries use for national adaptation plans, for NAPs, is basically led by the LEG through the different guidance materials. So she's going to guide us in terms of how do you deal with the issues of data and challenges around data to find solutions and analytical tools for LDCs as they define solutions for national adaptation plans. So now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Ms. Legata, for that really excellent presentation. As introduced already, I'm Sonam Kandu, LEG member from Bhutan. And today, on behalf of the LDC expert group, I will be making a presentation on the key challenges in building essential data and tools in the LDCs, and also looking at possible solutions. I would like to request if I might turn off my camera, because it gives problems with my internet connection. But now that I have put a voice to the face, I think that should be okay. So Julie, if you could share my slides. Yeah, next, please. So we all know that the National Adaptation Plans offer an opportunity for countries to address the impacts of climate change, but it also addresses multiple development objectives, which include food security, health, water, and other key areas. The LDC expert group provides a suite of modalities in advancing NAPs, and I will go into a little more detail in my later slides. And also, one of the key work of the LEG over the last couple of years has been to identify the gaps and needs for the LDCs in relation to NAPs. We have also noted the challenges in building essential data and tools, as well as looking at what might be possible potential solutions. Next. So as a group that provides technical support to the various LDCs, we provide direct country support. There are initiatives such as the Open NAP initiative, which basically mobilizes a wide range of interested organizations, experts, and stakeholders, almost like crowdsourcing, to support in the development and implementation of NAPs. We have also formed a group called the NAP Technical Working Group, and this is basically a collaboration between the LEG and various organizations in order to provide technical advice to countries on NAPs. So specifically, they look at advancing the work on the NAP guidelines, providing training, support on the Open NAPs, the Expos, and several other initiatives. Then more specifically, we engage the GCF Secretariat, the GEF, and the Adaptation Fund in the LEG meetings and other activities. So basically, countries and the parties have a direct interaction with these bodies in order to clarify their doubts, to seek support. We also provide a lot of outreach activities, especially in terms of the NAP Expos, which I'll again talk about in detail later, and also assist in preparing technical and policy papers on the various aspects of NAP and adaptation. The leg also provides a sort of channel for parties to provide information on how progress on NAP is being done. And also we prepare annual progress reports on the NAPs to report to the CMA, the COP, and the SBs, and also to other related activities such as the Paris Agreement. Yeah, more specifically on the NAP Expos, we do this annually. And it's where we try and get in a lot of agencies and organizations to meet with parties where they can share experiences and ideas on how they might advance on their NAPs. So it's more of an outreach event. Then we also collaborate with regional centers and organizations to also do regional NAP expos, so that we have a more concentrated group of countries that have similar issues that can look at advancing their NAPs. Then we have the NAP Central, which is basically an information hub for NAP. And it has various platforms that cater to event pages. It has a document repository management where you can already find some of the NAPs done by some of the countries, and some interactive blogger sites. We also engage with a lot of the bodies under the convention in order to address the mandates that come to us from the SBs, the COPs, and the CMA, in order to enhance synergy and coherence. Then again, apart from the NAP Technical Working Group, we try and engage and mobilize various regional centers and networks and relevant organizations to enhance support to the LDCs for adaptation. And this is generally done through the NAP Technical Working Group. So since I briefly touched on the NAP Technical Working Group, just to elaborate a little further on what is it that we actually do. So the NAP Technical Working Group provides an overall guidance and support to the countries in formulating and implementing their NAPs. And some of the the more activities that we work on are the open NAP case studies. So the NAP Technical Working Group provides integrative supplements and then see how we can test these in the some of the countries that we have taken up. Then we also work on the use of an M&A tool, the PEG tool, which is the Progress, Effectiveness, and Gaps. It's called the PEG tool. And this actually reviews the progress on the NAP process. The NAP Technical Working Group also works on pulling together the most appropriate approaches, tools, and methods to achieve various adaptation outputs and outcomes. We also compile information on how the various supplements that have been produced by the group are being used by countries, and also to gather information on the good practices. Next. So more specifically on the gaps and needs related to NAPs, the leg maintains an updated collection of gaps and needs for the LDCs. And specifically for the NAPs, the gaps and needs fall under the 9 areas that have been indicated here. And while we understand that data is a cross-cutting element for all the areas, the ones that are specifically related are gaps 3, 4, and 5, which is basically climate scenarios and science that has to be translated to the local context, the risk and vulnerability assessment, and the access to and use of technology. Next, please. So to elaborate further on the 3 gaps that I just mentioned, one is definitely centering around capacity. It's the capacity for the national, subnational, and sectoral experts to be able to work effectively with climate data and climate change scenarios. This is generally a big challenge for the LDC countries, which would actually assist them in the long-term climate change impacts and in decision-making. Then also the capacity to be able to frame, analyze, and define baselines so that they might be able to see how they're progressing and monitoring the climate change risk and vulnerabilities at different levels and scales. There's also a gap on the comprehensive risk and vulnerability assessments that covers all key sectors and systems at all different levels. And also there are gaps in the availability and accessibility of climate data and climate change scenarios to be able to produce an effective adaptation assessment, planning, and implementation. So this is, again, trying to look more in depth into what are the gaps in needs, especially when it comes to the LDCs. I think globally, there are a lot of data and information available, but the methods and tools for actually translating them into the local context is a challenge for LDCs. Also, we know that one of the objectives of the NAP is to reduce vulnerability, but there are gaps in specific methodologies and guidelines to be able to understand what is the baseline of vulnerability of a particular country and how are they progressing in terms of reducing it. So that is also one of the gaps in needs in the LDCs. Then again, there are a lot of available technologies, but being able to actually transfer these technologies and application of these latest technologies in climate change has been one of the gaps in needs highlighted by LDCs. And lastly, on the methodologies and guidelines for being able to apply qualitative and quantitative metrics and indicators in order to analyze and assess vulnerabilities, hazards, and systems is also a challenge for the LDCs. Now, having highlighted the gaps and needs from the LDCs, we also looked at what are the potential opportunities for addressing these challenges. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information, a lot of data, but what we would probably like to see, or what would the LDCs probably like to see, is how organizations can provide support by promoting a common and open database. So it's almost like a one-stop shop, for the countries to be able to use this data and information to assess their risk and vulnerability, to conduct their risk and vulnerability assessments. Then secondly, on being able to develop data infrastructure and to be able to promote networking for sharing data, information, and knowledge is probably one opportunity that we could try and get into. Then I've talked about the challenges of capacity. So this is, again, for the LDCs, it's a big issue. So how do we enhance the capacity of the local staff on new and emerging tools and methods for risk and vulnerability assessments? So this being able to address capacity is one of the issues that we should look into. And finally, of course, without finance, nothing really moves. So we need to have adequate and effective access to financial support. That, of course, includes GCF and other forms of support is also urgently needed in LDCs to develop, assess, and apply data and tools in adaptation planning. So basically, these are broadly the opportunities that organizations and centers can look into providing support for the LDCs in order to address the challenges of data and tools. So I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for Sonam for that presentation basically on behalf of the leg. And highlighting really some of the guidance that is there in terms of, and the challenges in terms of that countries face around developing a national adaptation plans, particularly the issue of data in terms of making sure that they're able to analyze, developing the baselines and also using the baselines now to project in terms of how they can measure themselves in terms of progress towards adaptation. So at this point in time, let's just have a few points of clarification if there's anyone that has anything before we go to our keynote speaker. So I'll allow only 2 interventions. If there's any key issues of clarifications to our 2 speakers, any key interventions, you may just raise your hand. I think you can raise your hand through the the system here. Anybody who has anything for clarifications to the 2 speakers? Okay, before I get any hand, we have on the chat who from Burkina Faso saying that totally agree with the private sector's contribution for adaptation at the grassroots level. Which strategy or action needs to be taken to make it effective based on profit-based operations of the private sector? I assume this question might be channeled to our NAP champion, Legade, in terms of the involvement of the private sector at the local level. What strategy or action in the interest of motives of the private sector? Are you able to respond to that, our NAP champion?
Yes. Your question is, how are people in the local level able to do their adaptation plans?
Yes, Noreen.
Yes, I'm losing you.
Exactly. How do you really involve the private sector at the local level, given that the private sector want to make a profit at the local level?
Okay. First, there's a national government, but all action or climate action really is local. And so it's important that local governments, meaning governors, mayors, and the private sector, including the academe, must help each other towards adaptation. And adaptation need not be high technology. It could be as simple as having rainwater collection. This is done in our state universities and colleges in our Department of Education, where our schools have water collectors. It could also be as simple as saving seeds, because to be able to have seedling banks, to be able to have nurseries where we have 3 seedlings under the National Greening Program, to be able to plant mangroves and seagrass beds, etc. So whether it's marine or terrestrial, but having all of these programs in the various agencies of government in the national level, cascading it to the local level, and having the executive department and the local governments in the local level collaborating to be able to implement this. What I'm saying is that all this talk we're doing in our respective countries, all the laws I've authored, however excellent, all the funding we have for adaptation, but if local governments do not understand it, implement it, and actually have measurable results from adaptation and mitigation finance, then it will all be to naught. So what am I saying? Everything is local. All action is local. So first, we must involve national and local governments, the academe, so we have science-based risk assessments, and the private sector as well. Businesses, industries, they must all embrace adaptation so that they do not exacerbate the already stressed environment and nature where we all thrive in. I hope I've made my point here.
Yeah, great. I think that's really very interesting what you're saying about the importance of mainstreaming adaptation at the local level within local government, local municipalities, the local authorities, and I think that applies at the national level as well, as we try to make sure that the National Adaptation Plan actions are sustainable. So anyway, that was just one point of clarification from one of our panelists, one of our guests. So for now, I think we'll try and go back to the keynote presentation, and then we'll have an interactive discussion after that. So our keynote speaker is Dr. Nakalambe Catherine. She's currently Assistant Research Professor at the University of Maryland, where she's also the Program Director for NASA Harvest Program. Now the NASA Harvest Program is basically NASA's program on agriculture and food security, which is led by the University of Maryland, where Dr. Catherine Nakalambe is the current program director. I must also say that she's actually, at the moment, the 2020 Africa Food Prize laureate because of the dedication to improving the lives of smallholder farmers using satellite data for decision making. So Catherine is going to basically give us some more information in terms of how do you strengthen agriculture and food security decisions with Earth observation systems and machine learning, basically integrating technology and food security and targeted at the most vulnerable, what is often referred to as the bottom billion, the small scale farmers. So with that, may I invite Dr. Catherine Nakalambe, who is also going to speak to the issue of how do we resolve the issue of data challenges that has been highlighted by our previous speakers on now. Dr. Catherine, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really honored and excited to be here today, as well as having heard from previous panelists about what's going on. I apologize. I have to give you a heads up. I have twin sons, and they tend to go crazy sometimes, and right now is one of those times. But I'll do my best to keep on time so we can have plenty of time to discuss. So I work for the NASA Harvest Program, which is NASA's Agriculture and Food Security Consortium. And I support work under the Group on Earth Observations Global Monitoring Initiative, as well as I'm on the NASA Severe Applied Sciences team, which is a joint NASA and USAID program. My work is primarily focused in Eastern Africa, and now I started moving into West Africa. But the NASA Harvest Program itself, we have a global perspective. We've had initiatives that cover the entire globe, including two specific products I'll talk about. Like I said before, Harvest's goal is to enable and advance the adoption of satellite Earth observations to benefit food security and agriculture and human and environmental resilience. So it ties in really well with what the previous speakers have spoken about. So we're trying to address huge data gaps by leveraging satellite Earth observations. It is NASA's contribution to the GeoGLAM initiative, which I will explain in a little bit. But some of the work we do focuses on this measure and their cross-cutting themes, trying to improve yield and crop conditions assessments, provide information for early warning and food security, information that's relevant for markets and trade. We work on developing methods as well as products for crop type and crop area estimates. We have a strong US domestic strategy and a large program now in Africa, as well as trying to engage with the public as well as the private sector in terms of ensuring that the tools and technology or the methods are applicable and scalable, as well as can be leveraged beyond. And we're also working with emerging technologies, realizing that in order to overcome a lot of the challenges we face, we have to take advantage of machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to process all the amounts of data that we keep getting, as well as to be able to provide them in a timely way. So GeoGLAM is a Group on Earth Observations Global Monitoring Initiative, and you can see the objectives of GeoGLAM and Harvest are intertwined. But GeoGLAM started at a time where there were big issues with, there'd been a big drought, which had affected crop production, which ended up affecting markets across the globe. And the realization that if we had used satellite Earth observations, we would have been able to understand what's coming or come up with ways of managing it. And so GeoGLAM is kind of set out to strengthen the international community's capacity to utilize this data in order to have coordinated, comprehensive, and sustained use of Earth observations, as well as better decisions across the globe. So for the rest of my presentation, I'll just give a brief overview of Earth observations, what I mean when I talk about it. A background on the Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiative's crop monitors, which are end-user-driven initiative. We've trying to sustain capacity, the capacity building that we're doing. The framework under which a lot of the work I've been doing falls, and share some of the tools and systems that we've used, and show some impact examples that would be relevant in adaptation planning as well. And so what value do Earth observations provide? There are so many satellites in orbit. They're all observing Earth. This is just an update. This is an image from October 10, 2019. And since then, there have been multiple satellites that have been sent into space, and a lot of them are looking down on Earth. The things that they provide, I think one of the critical important data pieces is being able to have the same data over a long time period in a consistent way. So they provide timely, objective data because it's not being collected manually or anything like that, but then it's also repeatable. It's global coverage, as you saw all the satellites facing Earth. Now we have a really long dance time record. We have systems that have been observing Earth since the 80s. We're looking at 30, 40-year records consistently. That makes it important for understanding how it does now compare to the past. And then you can try and understand how things are going, whether if you're looking at agriculture productivity, whether it's improving or not. They offer methods for diverse landscapes. So we can use the same satellite data to monitor different agriculture systems. You can see here, these are examples of agriculture fields when we look at satellite data. You can see smallholder, very fragmented small fields across this landscape in the top right. You can see larger fields in the bottom right. You can see irrigated circular fields, as well as these other irrigated fields on the bottom here. In this case, it's the same satellite. It's looking at all of these systems. So you'd have to use this data and come up with insights into what's going on. For example, what area was planted, what wasn't planted. You can see from these irrigated fields the summer brown, which is they're either harvested or planted, harvested or not planted, and the green ones are at different stages of development. They're low cost, which means that we can integrate. It's not exactly completely free because there are things that you need to put in place in order to take advantage of these tools, but low cost in the sense that with very little investment, you can take advantage of these tools. And one of the basic ones is just having an internet connection and a working computer. So our work has shown that these tools are usable and they work really well. And so they've been used for monitoring the entire globe. We have indices that we can use across for monitoring different things that are relevant for agriculture, everything from agriculture to looking at drought, to looking at flooding. It's basically available. And so one of the initial initiatives of the of GeoGlam was setting up the Crop Monitor for AMIS, which is a crop monitoring system that focuses on monitoring crop conditions in larger producer countries, which then led into the development of a crop monitor for early warning, which also leverages Earth observations to report on conditions in countries that are at risk of food insecurity. These two combined give a very good view of how crops are performing across the globe. I invite you to take a look at this story map, which tells a good story about how the crop monitors came into existence and where they're currently operational. You can see here, the blue is the crop monitor for AMIS countries. These are countries that are major exporters of primary grains. We have the early warning countries that are countries that are at risk of food insecurity. And then we have a regional crop monitor for Eastern Africa, as well as countries where there are operational crop monitors and others that are in development. There's an example of what the product looks like from a global scale when you combine assessments from AMIS and from early warning. Quick look into the bulletins. And from the time that we've been doing this, some of the things that we've realized are kind of relevant and important for integrating Earth observation. And in this particular case, I say specifically for smallholder agriculture, which is largely the agriculture that I'm monitoring in sub-Saharan Africa. We have having the capacity to analyze, interpret, and generate products is really important. Having access to satellite data at the right scale, both temporal and spatial resolution. Having automated workflows that you can leverage those big data systems, having consistent field data, which could come from regular assessments and regular surveys that then can inform the satellite monitoring, linking with regional and international efforts so that the relevance of in this global world we're in, the relevance of everything that we're doing has a significance across borders. And so the other is being able to create clear linkages to farmers, be it through better informed decisions, but as well as figuring out a way of getting the useful and most relevant data to them. And then the other is, of course, working with the private sector so that you can provide services like insurance or better seeds. And so our work has been successful largely because and then this graphic that I'm showing, it's kind of showing some of the key things that are required for having sustained capacity. And the work that we've been doing, even though we were not aware, I was not aware of this particular schematic, it falls very well within these. For example, we've worked to try and make sure that we embed knowledge within the institutions that we're working. This here is sort of a very complex, but very simple graphic in the end, where these different conditions here fall in specific places to make sure that we can have a robust system that leverages this satellite Earth observations and ensures that there's capacity at the national level, for example, to use it, but then have a clear way of communicating back this information to the farmer through the private sector or through other systems. So I'm going to go through like some of the things that we have done in order to be able to work within these 6 conditions for ensuring that the capacity of this, what we've done is sustained. The key one of the first ones is having systems that are global, replicable, transferable, and are available. So a lot of the crop conditions assessments are done using the Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiative monitoring system down here in the bottom right. On the bottom left, we have the Early Warning Explorer on the top right, where you can do assessments of rainfall and temperature, land surface temperature. You can look at forecast information for when is it going to rain next, how, you know, what's the average over the past few weeks, and how does that then relate to the conditions I'm seeing here. We have field data tools that are critical both for creating additional data sets for monitoring, as well as for understanding what's really happening on the ground. And we've done a lot of capacity building in this. And then a crop monitor system. So the global systems that I showed before were adapted to national and regional level in Eastern Africa. This is an example of the GLAM system. You can go there for any country in the world and do these assessments without, you know, needing anything installed on your computer. We've invested a lot of time and effort in building human capacity, as well as trying to identify how institutions can improve their capacity. So we've done a lot of trainings, and more recently, because of COVID-19, we've been doing a lot of these online, but they work really, really well because in the end, the institutions take over the tools and we're no longer involved in the running of the systems. The part about melding knowledge with external and internal expertise. So of course, our tools and systems go a long way, but if you don't have expertise within the institutions where we're working, it doesn't work. These are some of the individuals that I've worked very closely with in East Africa who have been, you know, champions of getting the work going, and the champions idea that is, you know, what part of what NAP is really critical. The other thing is just having clear partnerships, not only with the recipient stakeholders, but as well as with institutions that can help, you know, ensure that you can leverage more of those tools. The other, I think, is understanding the policy context, being able to identify where those tools fall within what the country is planning, and then expanding on that, or working within the process and understand, you know, where governments want to improve. An example is in Tanzania. When we were initiating our work in Tanzania, they were developing this agricultural sector development program, and this was for phase 2. And because of the work we were doing, you know, they specifically wrote in there that they're, you know, going to emphasize improving early warning systems using satellite Earth observations. The other, going back to this so many logos, is just leveraging the capabilities. And I think I hinted on it before, where you have all these agencies and organizations that are data providers or service providers or funding research, who are really interested in making sure that organizations can take advantage of those tools. And it's important to know where they are and where they fall so that you can leverage what they're trying to do. So we've now focused a lot on improving baselines, because monitoring smallholder agriculture is tough, which is majority of in some cases, livelihoods of 70% of the population depend on small fields. And I recently read that, you know, we cannot ignore smallholder farmers, especially if we want to ensure sustainability, because large-scale agriculture will probably not be able to get us where we want to go in terms of nutrition and on all other things. And so it's really tough because it is in some cases a question of like a person's livelihood. So you want to be able to provide as much support as possible, and you want to inform policies. But the reason why it's tough is that again is because we have very small and very complex systems. So you have mixed agriculture, you have mixed fields with different crops growing, you have huge trees in the fields. This becomes really complicated when you're trying to use satellite remote sensing. And so we've focused on trying to produce better products that are relevant for smallholder monitoring. So we've had there are quite a number of products that are coarse resolution that don't work really well when you're trying to assess smallholder agriculture. And so we've been combining ground data with satellite data, using machine learning to be able to produce like updated cropland maps. This is an example for one we did this year for Togo for 2019, and one we just completed for Kenya. Having these types of products then enables us to be able to track conditions throughout the growing season, but also allows us to be able to see where things stand. So if we have this level of clarity about where the fields are and extract just information on this field, we can check productivity, in the past, and then we could combine that with models about production. And so going back to working in partnerships, I think all of this has been possible, of course, because we've been able to leverage partners. And I'm going to show some impact examples that attributed to contributions from all those partners. One of the initial significant things in my career was contributing to this food security assessment report. This was back in 2015. I just completed a field assessment. I did an analysis with remote sensing, and I just showed that across the whole country, there was a extreme drought, and in the Northeast, it was much worse than the rest of the country. And 2 days of presenting that report, a decision was made and food aid was sent to this region. However, that's not the win of the story. The win of the story is that this same process was adapted and used in the disaster risk financing project that was started in 2016, a year later, and became part of the monitoring that's done to scale up this program. And since then, over 300,000 people in that region have been supported in the Kamboja region. And just in 2016, 2017, the government was able to save $2.6 million, which instead of spending that in emergency funds for responding to food insecurity, they could use for other services. And then this is an example from Kenya, like being able to track from the start to the end of the season, as well as having access to ground data about where things might be bad is really important, because this earlier on, as of May 2019, there was, likelihood of the field failing completely. But then later on, the field recovered. It's kind of miraculous in this case. But then, other fields around didn't survive. This is the same that was taken. These 3 were taken around the same time. So just being able to monitor the whole country gives you a perspective of what exactly is happening and why it is happening. And Kenya has a crop insurance program that at the time was supporting 12,000 farmers, and they were able to scale it up now. They cover 350,000 farmers. And the cost of running this program has reduced significantly because they're using Earth observations and tracking, and trying to figure out what fields to assess. Some of the key lessons is that these data are useful and applicable and across, different landscapes in different countries. And, we can really leverage these. With investments in training for capacity building, it's easy. It is easy and quick to adapt and uptake these tools. It's feasible and affordable to use these new technologies. For example, being able to provide high quality baseline data, like on crops and where crops are growing, and having a clear strategy for sustainability, including using existing systems for data collection, has been really, really important, as well as the partnerships between government, universities, and private sector. So our university being able to contribute to the disaster risk financing program, through the design of the trigger mechanism, was really critical for the Ugandan government. And so in summary, I believe everybody on this call is very well familiar with the first point, that things are going to get worse. And unless we prepare well, we will not be able to manage the challenges that climate change is bringing. It's going to get worse for farmers who are dependent on their fields. And as you've seen from my presentation, that satellite Earth observations provide a strong, reliable, and strategic basis for informing programs and policies, as well as, entire, for the agriculture sector, but is applicable in other sectors, everything including water resources monitoring and forest monitoring. And there are tools and systems that have been, developed specifically targeting improving monitoring of those resources. And as climate change, of course, progresses, there'll be more and more need for timely and accurate data. And in order to help farmers adapt, we would definitely need to know where we stand, like where farmers stand, like how are their fields doing right now compared to everybody else around them, or compared to how they were a few years ago. And then figure out ways of helping them adapt to the changes that are coming, either through, using better inputs, changing out seeds, or, investing in systems for irrigation. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Wow, excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Nakalambe. Really very granular information that we believe is very, very helpful for supporting national adaptation plans, particularly at the local level. I mean, this has been one of the key issues that has been raised by developing countries. How do you make sure that adaptation planning moves from the capital cities into the provinces, into the rural areas, into the catchments, and into the watersheds, really affecting the most vulnerable people, which is mostly small-scale, rural-based peasant farmers. And I think through your work, you've really articulated very well in terms of how using machine learning and satellite data, we can try and address these challenges. So obviously very interesting to me. I come from the Global Water Partnership, and obviously I'm very interested in terms of how best this could also be extended to cover monitoring around water resources availability, because that is really key when it comes to agriculture and food security. I mean, obviously many takeaways. We are going to go into an interactive discussion, but for me, one of the key issues that really come out is how do you coordinate all these so many partners and so many stakeholders? As you see, and we have been told over and over by the UNFCCC, the LEG expert group, and the UNFCCC Secretariat, that NAP should be very much considered as not sectoral. We should not look at sectors. And clearly this presentation has shown that you need to mobilize a broad range of actors, working with Ministry of Meteorology and Data, working with Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of Education. So it is really an ideal case of what I think is often called the Open NAP initiative that the UNFCCC has always tried to advocate, so that we are not focusing at national adaptation planning, looking at specific sectors, let's say agriculture, health, water, food, and others, but we really look at national adaptation planning from an integrated perspective, using, of course, the Sustainable National Development Planning process, the SDGs as the overall framing at the national level, but also making sure that the National Adaptation Plan itself is used as an overarching tool at the national level for planning and coordinating adaptation. So thank you very much for that presentation, very enlightening. And I like what my colleague from UNDRR has just mentioned in the chat, David, and I read, interesting that both presentations included considerations of big data, artificial intelligence, space-based information. It indicates that now we are getting down to brass, to the actual things that really matter. So thank you very much for that intervention as well, David. So I have two colleagues that had raised their hands earlier, but I promise that I'll come back to them as we go through the interactive discussion. So I'm going to call them now to basically make their interventions. This is Joanne Rueda, as well as Abraham Chambi. You are welcome to make your very quick interventions, questions or clarifications or comments. Over to you. Joanne?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm Juan Rueda from the National Planning Agency in Colombia. Basically, well, my question applies to any of the three presenters. Basically, one of the challenges or one of the remarks that someone made, excuse me, was that you gotta guide yourself with science rather than experience. And I guess that I wanted to know a little bit more, or I relate that. Excuse me, 2 seconds.
Yes, go ahead, Abraham. And I'll also invite the speakers if you can just switch on your video so that our panelists can see you.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry, it's my broadband is very weak. Yeah, so basically what I wanted to know is that how do you, I guess, work not rather than only guide yourself blindly by experience, and I guess taking into by science, like, but taking into account also experience and I guess like identities of local communities that have such a huge stake and importance in all this process, and just kind of like trying to get a little bit more of the sense like of how do you how do you basically connect both things, because I believe that only science is not necessarily the solution, or it necessarily responds or makes the work the most efficient.
Alex, you're on mute.
Thank you. Let's have the other question from Abraham, and then we ask the speakers to respond. Abraham, over to you.
Okay, I'm Abraham Tumbe from Liberia, and I listened to the presenter from Philippines, and I took key interest in the development of a local national adaptation plan. And so I wanted for her to share her experience with respect to how they managed to overcome the challenges with respect to data constraints at the local level. More besides, I would be interested in her sharing the connect between the local National Adaptation Plan and the National Adaptation Plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Abraham. Let's give now a chance to our speakers to respond to that. So over to you, Catherine, as well as the other speakers, particularly the NAP champion as well from the Philippines.
I can respond well to the first one. I think you raise a really good point. I think science without experience or knowledge or understanding of the local context in most cases will limit how far the tools go. And so it is absolutely important, even in that framework that I showed about ensuring capacity, that things will work beyond a project or beyond when all the scientists leave. I think important thing is to be able to understand the local context. And the tools that we have developed are adaptable to the sense that, for example, in Mali, they reported a completely different scale than they do in Kenya because they have very specific needs. But tying into, I guess, a little bit, I'm not in a good place to answer the second question, is that the crop monitors that I showed, and I think my slide on the national systems didn't show up, but it's that these global systems have been adapted to national and regional level. And some countries are trying to figure out a way of not figuring out, it's really just to implement like a sub-regional level reporting, that you can have a more detailed report for a specific country. And that's part of, a way of ensuring that countries can actually really leverage those tools at that, at a much lower level. I'll stop there. Maybe.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dr. Nakalambe. And Laureen Legada, are you able to respond to the issue of the other question? Okay, I don't see our NAP champion, but perhaps we want to move as much as possible to the interactive discussion where everyone can participate. So I'm going to allow only one more question and be very brief. Mamadou, if you can go ahead. Hello, Mamadou, can you go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, you have the floor.
Yeah. My question is to Catherine for a presentation. I see many technical details, scientific methodology, and I would wish to know for a local community, how costly could be to ask for or to make a request for such kind of a methodology or technical, skills and software to be able, to assess vulnerability. I remember for Burkina Faso years ago, when we started the formulation of our NAP, we call upon an American institute that provides us with threshold 21. It was very costly. So without a project that could sustain or provide funding for such kind of tools, how do you think we can overcome this? It's really a challenge for developing countries, mainly for LDCs, if we don't have any project. Thanks.
This you raise a really, really good point. One of the fact being that a lot of tools and technologies are developed within a project frame, which for me, I think defeats the purpose if there is no clear, sustained way of making sure that these tools will continue to function after the project, for example. So imagine it arrives and then the project ends, so it's not being sustained. What I think would be a really unique and important thing to be done is that government institutions that are on the receiving end of these tools, if they identify that this particular technology is useful and is really changing how things are being done in a positive way, I think they need to take this up and run with it. The examples that I showed before, for example, for Kenya, we set up, the system. We trained their ministry several times through the project that we had, and I remain, connected. I guess, connected and working and supporting those institutions, but on a personal level, because I really want to make sure that we can continue to leverage as newer things come along, we take advantage of those things. But it requires that the government really stands behind when something really changes things in a positive way, so that they take it on and it becomes part of a process. Otherwise, it would always remain within that project frame. There'll be a new project that will introduce something new. It'll also stop at some point. And I think, for me, that is one of the most strategic way. The other point that I think you hinted on is how to make this information relevant at the local level. It also goes back to the question from before, ensuring that the information is packaged in a way that is relevant for the level at which it's being communicated. I think to a farmer, if you had an education program for journalists who, people who work on radio, who would receive this report and are able to translate what is in the report, and they, through radio programs communicated, you could do it that way. The other way would be developing very specific, text message based information to farmers, that it's not going to rain the next 10 days, or this is what it was in the last couple of weeks. This is how it's likely to affect your production. It just has to be packaged in a way that is relevant at that scale. The other thing I think you also hinted on was the technical capabilities with cloud computing and all these open tools that are available. It is possible for an individual to teach themselves how to learn how to use these tools. One of the things that we're focusing on is providing learning material that can bring you from step A to Z so that you can do these assessments. So we record, I've been recording a lot of my recent trainings, for example, for the team in Mali, for them to go back and see what is being done, but then to also make sure that we can create a program around it, that we can share it for other ministries where we're not able to go, to be able to take advantage of it. But, it also still requires some kind of a jump start that you can get people interested in the technology. That's the other thing. It's getting people interested in the technology is important, because it can exist, but unless you get them interested in the technology, which goes back to the point about it's not just about science, then they can, do amazing things with it and go with it, which would sustain it beyond the project.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Nakalambe. And Dr. Nakalambe, obviously, his work is very, very interesting. We could go on for the whole day, as this is really very, very interesting in terms of where it really matters at the local level. Please post your comments in the chat box, your questions. We will not be able to respond to all of them during this session, but I'm sure the UNFCCC Secretariat, working with the speakers, will try and make sure that they're able to get back to you for specific questions. There are also very interesting comments that have been shared in the chat. One from Salim Hoku from the Bangladesh, who has also shared that for sustainability, we must make sure that we involve local universities, local training institutions. And also we have to remember the point that was mentioned by the Congress, our NAP champion from Philippines, about the importance of integrating all this work into local and national and district development planning processes, so that it's not disconnected from reality, from their national systems. So for the next session, for the next 10 or 15 minutes, what we're gonna have is an interactive discussion, focusing on a few specific questions that we are going to be led by the UNFCCC Secretariat. So it is my honor and pleasure now to invite Jory Amblaso from the UNFCCC Secretariat, who is going to give us guidelines so that we can all participate in this. Jory, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex. So at this point, I would like to invite everyone to take out their mobile phones or use their computer to log into slido.com and key in the code V6 hashtag V693. And in here, you will see the first question that will pop out. And I think at this time, I will give it back to Alex to discuss the first question. Over to you, Alex.
Great, thank you. Hope you have managed to be able to log on using your phones. We're hoping that you have data as well. The first question is, what are essential elements of adaptation plans to ensure they lead to progress in addressing the many aspects of adaptation action and reporting? The question is on your screen, so please, you can just type in your response, make it as short as possible. What are essential elements of adaptation plans to ensure they lead to progress in addressing many aspects of adaptation action and reporting? We want to see your responses. As you respond, please submit. We'll be able to see your responses on the screen. Okay, there we go. What are the essential elements for adaptation plans to ensure they lead to progress in addressing the many aspects of adaptation? Specific goals and objectives, science, subsidiarity, enabling policies, participatory inclusiveness, community-based, again, science-based, should be localized. Let's keep the answers coming. How to factor in and assessing the impacts of climate change. Okay, let's keep them coming. Sectoral information and data, political will and engagement, South-South cooperation, information directions, M1E, risk and vulnerability assessments, very good. Data availability. Informed data, small but concrete actions than impossible goals, that's a good one. Historic impact, current and future vulnerability, priority activities, financing and reporting. Oh, that sounds like an interesting structure. Nature-based solutions, financial resources. So we are discussing the essential elements for adaptation plans to ensure they lead to progress in addressing the many aspects of adaptation. Okay, so very interesting. And I think what we're seeing here is a wide variety of responses. I'm going to invite my colleague, Alpha Jallo, to basically provide his perspective in terms of, I mean, when you see all these responses, Alpha, what's your reaction? What's your perspective? What do you think about this? Alpha Jallo, may I invite you to come on the screen, please?
Hi, Alex. Yes. I think we lost Alpha. So I would like to take over and invite Obaking Setamo from Saskal to reflect on the questions on the question that we have posed. Obaking? Are you?
Thank you very much. I'm here. I was muted for some time. So yeah, on the question that what are essential elements of adaptation plans to ensure they lead to progress in addressing many aspects of adaptation. So I think most of the responses here show that progress is realized when plans are easily and quickly implemented. The more time you take on developing these plans, usually you are doing something that might not be relevant to the country needs. Also, it's important that we package concrete actions into programs and projects that can easily be translated into funding requests. This really covers a lot of ground that you don't have to repeat a lot of work now when you are preparing for funding. Plans should also contain specific goals and objectives to facilitate monitoring and assessment of progress, which is really important for monitoring and evaluations. Plans should also align very closely with plans for accessing the GCF at national level. It's still going to the point of the plans be able to be translated into funding requests. Plans should also include information and direction for integrating climate change into development planning and other processes. The question of relevance, is this really relevant to what the country is looking at, or where the country is planning to go in the coming 5 or so years? Should also address needs of all major stakeholder groups beyond just government ministries. Earlier we were talking about the engagement of the private sector and other stakeholders that are really important for this movement. Should also facilitate reporting on national progress adaptation. It's really important that we can measure our adaptation and report it as we engage in this process, and should also address capacity gaps and work towards building lasting human and institutional capacity over time. We always talk about capacity and the gaps, and we believe that at this point, really, we should be having the capacity ourselves to deal, with these gaps that are experienced within different countries. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. I think, what you're seeing here is there's so many different elements that really need to be addressed in terms of national adaptation plans. And it looks like quite a lot, but I think one of the comments here is that start small, but obviously with a bigger vision in terms of where you want to go with clear targets and goals. And I think the UNFCCC Secretariat through the LEG has developed guidelines for national adaptation plans with clear elements that needs to be considered. But of course, that has to be context specific. So excellent interventions. Thank you for everyone. Let's go now to the next question, which is going to be posted right now on the screen. And this one is going to be easier now because we've gotten used a little bit. How do we ensure every country has a plan as a first step? How do we ensure every country has a national adaptation plan as a first step? So we can, again, let's keep on putting the responses. How do we ensure every country has a national adaptation plan? Okay, part of the UNFCCC commitments, countries have committed, so they should have a plan. That's the response. Support has to be provided to have one of the, despite the gaps. Finance, capacity building, political will is needed. Making it compulsory for GCF funding. That's basically telling the GCF they must provide the money, okay? Have a framework that countries can use to develop their plans. I like that. The National Development Plan, for instance, could be such an example. Access to climate information, provision of technical assistance, raise ambition at the level of the General Assembly, the Parliament, or the Cabinet, basically. Make it a global responsibility to ensure every LDC has a good plan. Systemic and science-based approach must be taken. The need for pragmatism, no need to wait for perfect information, make use of what's available. Strong coordination, political support at the national level. So very interesting interventions. And I mean, most of these relate to financing, technical assistance, capacity, as well as mobilizing political will and at the highest level. Now, I'm going to invite my colleague from Zambia, who I know is currently working on the National Adaptation Plans, to provide a reflection on what he thinks based on these responses. Mr. Ephraim Shitima, you have the floor from Zambia, the Director of Climate Change in Zambia. Ephraim?
No, thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, good morning, colleagues. Very interesting points here arising from how we can ensure that all countries, particularly LDCs, have a good national adaptation plan for them to indeed build resilience in their countries. For me, what stood out is that we need to move just beyond the challenges. We are aware of the challenges that LDCs have. So instead of focusing on what are the capacity constraints and all that, let's draw our attention to ensuring that all LDCs at least have a national adaptation plan, because that's a starting point. If all LDCs can have a national adaptation plan, then we'll be moving to ensuring that resilience is built in these countries and implementation will follow. And so points were very broad, a number of them indicating that we've done a lot in terms of identifying needs and gaps, and we'll continue getting the same findings. When you look at the needs and gaps, it may not change. So the need is to be pragmatic, as some points indicated, to practically focus our global attention, take it as a global responsibility to ensure that all LDCs at least have a good national adaptation plan so that we can move through implementation. And we've seen how long it takes for a few countries to have their NAPs in place at the moment. And therefore the need to move with speed and ensure that all LDCs have a good national adaptation plan is key from the points that were coming out, Alex. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ephraim, Director of Climate Change from Zambia. And I know you're working very hard. I know it took you 2 years to get funding from the Green Climate Fund for your National Adaptation Plan, but you have the funding now. And I think from what you are saying that we needed to pay attention to LDCs. I think LDCs are prioritized as the most vulnerable in the Paris Agreement, in the Green Climate Change Agreement, in the JEF funding instruments. LDCs often are prioritized, but we need to make sure that we try and mobilize action across South-South collaboration to ensure that every country has a plan. So the last question basically speaks directly to the presentation we had from Dr. Makalambe, which is about how do we use best available science and frontier technologies to transform plan development? How do we use best science available and also the frontier technologies, machine learning, artificial intelligence to transform development of national adaptation plans? So if we can just quickly begin to respond to that as well. Thank you very much. Enhanced capacity, great one. I think it came back. It was also one of the keys that were mentioned from our colleague from Burkina Faso. We need to enhance capacity. Yes, let's keep it moving. How do we harness the science and the technology that we heard from Dr. Makalambe, Catherine from the University of Maryland, and NASA Harvest program? Relate science technologies to local contexts. Ensure access to technology, intentionally seeking it out. So it means we must have a target and an indicator for it. Combine knowledge and science with indigenous knowledge, very interesting. Make it available to everyone and be taught in local schools and universities. I think this is the intervention we got from Bangladesh as well. Make sure the ministries have the capacity to use it. Ask for the best data, seek support from academia and research institutions, These are all extremely interesting contributions and ideas for those of us who are working on national adaptation plans. Partner with local universities, local research institutions, enhance technology transfer and cross-sharing between regions and countries. This is obviously what the UNFCCC Secretariat can support us on. Reduce capital interest and consider it as a public good, access to technology. Facilitate data sharing and information. So obviously very, very interesting. I like the one about integrating science and policy. This is very, very interesting. Ensuring regulations of technologies like drones, for instance. That must be interesting to Dr. Nakalandi as well, given the work that you've done before in this area. Okay, colleagues, this is very, very interesting, and keep the responses coming on. And I'm going to invite my colleague Angeli from the Global Water Partnership, Water and Climate Adaptation Specialist, to provide her reflection based on the work you have been doing in different countries. Angeli, what do you think about all these responses you see now to this question? Angeli Lohan, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks so much, Alex. This question is very interesting, as well as all the responses that are coming in. I'm trying to make sense of all the responses, and I see them broadly falling into 3 buckets. It seems like to ensure that we can use the best available science to do transformative NAPs, NAP development, as well as transformative approach to NAP implementation. First of all, there must be some technical capabilities in the country. There must be a demand for using this technology that requires awareness, as well as there must be access from the country to these technologies. And these may be in the form of these partnerships with these technology hubs, such as the one that Professor Catherine Nakalambe presented to us. They may be via growing these capabilities in the local universities. They may be actually growing the capabilities within local mandated institutions, local government, and or via the open NAP, like global information and technology exchange. So that's one category that I see. On the technology side, there must be demand as well as access. The second point I see is that there must be political will. There must be political interest. It must be a top political priority that adaptation planning be technology-driven, science-based and technology-driven, harnessing the best technology that is out there. That will lead the countries to be setting targets, to be monitoring the use of technology, to ensure that they're getting the best bang out of their buck and making the best use of their time to do their adaptation planning and adaptation plan implementation. The third point I see is on the administrative feasibility side. There must be capabilities, technical capabilities, as well as the budget for it. Several items have come up that, this kind of access to this wonderful technology out there is usually project-based. So it's tied to the project funding. How can then the government budgeting or sustainable climate financing, such as via the GCF or via the other, via the Adaptation Fund, via GEF, other financing mechanisms that are out there, including the national budgeting process, prioritize budgeting for using this kind of science and technology. Both of this technical feasibility as well as administrative feasibility ultimately are tied to the political will and political championing. And it was great to see, just tying it back to Senator Lauren Legarda's presentation, her demonstration of this championing at the highest political levels is needed to bring about that transformative change at the national and ground level planning as well as implementation. Those are my thoughts. Thanks very much, colleagues.
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. We are over time now. We are 8 minutes over the scheduled time, but we want to thank you for the interesting contributions. This is an obviously very interesting topic to organize this because the issues being discussed here are the most ones where you get a lot of questions at the local level as countries face these challenges. So I want to thank our distinguished speakers before we have a summary of the main key points. But let me just give a key appreciation to our 3 speakers, starting with, of course, the NAP champion from the Philippines, Lauren Legarda, who highlighted the importance of work. We also heard from Sonam in terms of data and analytical tools that are required to help countries as they develop, particularly LDCs, as they develop their national adaptation plans. And Dr. Catherine Nakalambe, who is, as I mentioned, the Africa Pride, she currently won that prize as the one of the two recipients, co-recipient of the Africa Food Prize for 2020, awarded by the Africa Food Prize Committee, chaired by His Excellency President Olusegun Obasanjo, the former president of Nigeria. So obviously your work is very, very inspiring, Catherine. We really thank you for your availability, and very, very inspiring. And I'm sure most of our colleagues will be in touch with you. Thank you for that. So let me now hand over to Julie for the main key points as we try to close the session. Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And I don't have to. I don't have anything to add more to what you have said. You have very eloquently captured all the points that were raised at this discussion. I just want to reiterate that the information that our presenters have presented today will be posted in the webpage, in the event page that we shared with you earlier. And the video recording of this webinar will also be available. So thank you very much once again, and see you again in the next webinar.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.